This video, we're going to be talking about functions in C++. Now, I like to relate the concept of functions in programming to functions in math. So for our first example, we're going to look at a math function. I'm going to say there's an f of x and y, and that's going to equal x raised to y, like so. It's just a simple power function. And in math, we know that if you do something like f of 2 and 4, wherever the x is, 2 will be. Wherever the y is, we'll plug in 4. So it's going to be like that. And that's going to equal 16. So if we call something f of 2 and 4, we're going to get the value back, 16, returned to us. And so we're going to we're going to code this function. Before this recitation topic, what we would have done is do everything inside int main. And so we're going to do that first, and then we're going to see how we can change it so that we're calling functions outside of main. So to start, I'm going to have x, y, and let's say power. X and y are going to be our inputs, and power is going to hold the answer. After that, we're just going to do some cout cin dialog. To make sense, I'm going to print out the definition of the function, so like so. And then I'm going to ask enter x. The user enters x, and then enter y. The user enters y. Okay, and so now let's do the hard code for doing powers. I'm going to set power equals to 1, and then I'm going to do a for loop. I'm going to go from 0 to y, I++, and inside I'm going to multiply power by the base. Okay, so the logic behind this, let's say we're going to do, 2 raised to the 4 again. So first power is going to equal 1, and then our for loop is going to go from 0 to 4, not including 4, so it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's 4 iterations. And in each loop, we're going to multiply by the base. So 0, 1, 2, 3. And we see, that's the same as 2 to the 4th, so this will result in power having the value of 16. So the last thing to do is to just see out the answer. I'm going to say f of x, comma space, y, close parentheses, equals power. Let's do a line break. Okay. Now, one of the purposes or the one of the good uses of functions is that it'll remove the clutter from int main. So instead of having 3 lines of code, we can just have 1 line of code calling a function. It'll be useful as our programs get more complex, and if my program, let's say, has to call the power function 15 times in 15 unique scenarios, so I can't loop it, I don't want to have this repeating 15 times in my main. I just want to be able to call it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make a function. We're going to define it up here above int main, and then we're going to call it inside int main, and that's how it's going to work. So we're going to start off with a function signature. I'm going to say double pow, double x, or no, let's do double base, comma, double exponent, like so, squiggly brackets. So what a function does is you have your return type, you have your function name, and then you have to declare or define the parameters that you're expecting. If you look up here in our math function, we're expecting 2 numbers, an x and a y. Here, I'm just calling it a base and an exponent. It's the same thing as, f base x equals base raised to the x. It's different names, but they're in the same place, so they have the same functionality kind of deal. Okay? When you're defining your arguments, you want to make sure that you also say what data type it is. You can't just say base and exponent. you can't assume that the user or that the computer will take in a number, because it might expect a string, it might expect a boolean, but the way we want our function, we want it to be numbers. And we know that doubles can also hold whole numbers, so it's okay. Now that we have that, we're gonna put in the code that'll do what we want it to do. In this case, the power algorithm. Okay, so I'm gonna say double answer equals 1, do the same for loop, I is less than exp, because exp is now in place of where y was, I plus plus. And then we just multiply by the base, and at the end, return ants. I'm going to scroll down here to int main. What I can do is I can erase this, and now I'm going to replace it with power equals pow x comma y. Okay, we know we have values for x and values for y. I'm just going to keep using the 2 raised to the 4 example. And this is what will happen when we compile. First, the compiler sees that we've defined a function, and so if we see pow with 2 numbers, we're going to do this, and then we're going to return back the value of answer wherever it's called. Sounds good? Okay, so we're going to keep going. We see main, this is where things get executed. We got our doubles, we got our dialog. Let's say the user enters 2 for x and y for 4. Okay, power equals pow x comma y. Aha, I've seen that up here, and so we're going to do this process. Like so. So wherever base is, 2 is going to get plugged in there. Wherever 4 or wherever exponent is, 4 is going to get plugged in there. So it'll look like this. And then this whole thing will run, and it'll return the answer back to where you called your function. And so it'll be as if this was written, power equals 16. Or if you're a stickler, now that is certainly a double. Okay? Let me change this back. Oops. There we go. So that's what happens. Our signature up here tells us the return type of the function, tells us the name, and tells us the parameters that it's expecting. You gotta make sure that the return type is corresponding to what you actually return. We know that ants is a double. That's good. If I did, Boolean ants, this would not work because I cannot return a Boolean if my function says I'm returning a double. Okay, so let's revert that back. And to call it inside main, all you gotta do is call the name. You don't have to say double pow. Just call the name and pass the parameters. Okay? Again, you don't have to say double x. Don't have to do that, because we know that x is already a double. And this should work. In fact, let's give it a go. Okay, great. It's outputted my function. Enter x. I'm going to do, let's be spicy, 3. And then let's do 4. So 3 raised to the 4. That equals 81. Clear screen, and let's head back over here. Okay, so this is a function that returns something. Now we're going to see how to write a function that returns nothing. A function can return nothing, but it'll still do the code inside, so it still has its use. And the most common thing for void functions is, at least for this class, is going to be cout statements. So I'm just going to give a bit of an example. My name is Ethan. I like my dog, and his name is Moose. Rep Army Group South. Sad face. Also rep my midterm scores. Although I don't think I did bad. Okay. Let's say for your homework you have to do print greeting. Let's say this is my greeting, right? Um, what I can do, instead of having 4 lines of code clutter my main, is I'm going to make a function here that does this, and I'm just going to keep calling that. So for functions that do not return anything, it's going to have a void. Let's call a function print greeting. Now, if all we want to do is print out these 4 things, we're not going to need any parameters. It's not like some math function where the answer is dependent on the input. Here I'm just going to be doing the same thing. So that's why the parentheses are empty, but you still need the parentheses. This one's a little easier. I just cut and paste. Scroll back down to main, and then I'll do print greeting, like so. Okay. Now, with void functions, as you can see, there's no return statement because we're returning nothing. That's what void means. And because we're returning nothing, we're not saying something like, int x equals print greeting. Or we're not even saying if I must use strings. So include string. I'm not saying string x equals print greeting. I'm just doing print greeting. The reason is, if I do string x equals print greeting, well, print greeting doesn't return a value. It does stuff, yes, and it will do that, but it doesn't return a value. So it's as if you've written this, and you haven't really passed a value in string over here, in x. I should call this another name. So this will probably give you an error. This will definitely give you an error. Okay, so the correct way of going about it is just have it as its own. So don't do this. If it's void, just give it its own line. Okay, so let's run this bad boy again. Alright, so we do still have our power function over here. And after that, I just do my print greeting, and it shows it. So everything is working well. In fact, let's say if I do another end line over here in our print greeting, I can just keep calling this. Because I have it defined over here, and instead of having 12 cout statements, I have 3 calls. Now, is this practical? No, because I'm just really memeing it up for the print greeting. But it'll run. Ta-da! Okay, so that's the structure of void functions. This is the structure of a double function. Really what functions do is that they do a certain process. You define it because you code it. And after that process, it'll either return a value or it won't. Void functions don't return a value. Like ints, Boolean functions, string functions, time structure functions, they will all return values. But what they all have in common is that they will also, all functions will perform the code that's inside them. Okay, so here is the code. Little crash course into functions. If you have any questions, you can always let me know. And I'll be glad to sit down and go through other things. All right? Okay.